I think I would start by defending lawyers. I am a lawyer. So
somebody's got to do it.
To do that. Well, I don't do it anymore. So I am.
No, I mean somebody's got to defend them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in a country that's defined by the rule of law, and in which the adversarial system means that everybody has representation. But if you want to blame somebody, I think the blame can fairly be put at the feet of politicians who frame the laws. I mean, all judges do is interpret and apply the law, and all lawyers do is argue the case. But it's the
well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, David, isn't it? I mean, because the bottom line is, I believe, and you may differ from me on this, that we are living in a slightly different world now. Now, it's one thing to say everybody should have a second chance. It's one thing to say rehabilitation is a thing that we should have in our system, but it's an entirely different thing to say that somebody who has vowed to die on the altar of Islamic fundamentalism has laughed his way into prison, has shown no remorse whatsoever, but when the police say this is a dangerous man who should not be released back out onto the streets, somehow there's no mechanism to stop that. So the politicians are seemingly incapable of stopping it.
But there was a mechanism to stop it. There were indeterminate sentences that could and were passed, and those were abolished by the last government. I mean, there are a whole range of reasons that they were abolished. But, I mean, it is not true that we didn't have a mechanism for dealing with such people. We did, but that was a law that was abolished.
Well, we don't currently have one, let's put it that way.
That's true. And the other thing is that, you can't retrospectively change the law. You can't sentence somebody under a piece of legislation. And then after that sentence being passed...
Well, and that is a problem, which is a legal problem, not one that the politicians can change, right?
Well, but the politicians create that problem by...
I get that, David. But what I'm saying is the situation which we are currently in, which is that we know there are several hundred people who have been released early from their sentence for one reason or another. You might say because the law says that can happen. It seems at the moment that the government is incapable of changing that.
Well, the problem isn't so much, when they're released or whether that's determined to be halfway through their sentence or not. What you really need is a mechanism whereby people who have been released from prison can be recalled to prison. They can do that for a determinate period of time under the existing regime. But if you've got indeterminate sentences, then it means you can recall those people to prison without a need for a further trial if there's any sign of them reoffending.
Right.
And that is what we don't have at the moment.
Right. But this is where I think we need to make a bit of a step change, is my argument this morning. I'm not just going to sit here. I'm not just blaming lawyers. What I'm blaming is the system as such, right? And I think you will know as well as I do that there are lawyers who work within the system to do everything they can to make sure that the bad guys get out. Now, and
there are lawyers who work on the other side who make sure that they stay in. But, I'm agreeing with you about 90%.
Yes.
But
I know.
I think
listen, I don't expect anyone to agree with me.
The laws have to be there.
I don't expect anyone to agree with me 100%, David. Otherwise, the world would be a very strange place indeed.
Right.
But, the point is this. We now know of 2 cases within the last 2 months where 2 people who were thought to be on, watch lists. One was very different. The London Bridge attacker was actually thought to be a complete sort of changed man.
Right, he was a poster boy, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was. And I mean, I'm not going to say too much about that situation because I think it's tragic that the man who wanted him rehabilitated was one of the men who ended up dying on the altar of his own sort of cause. But in this case, this guy was very much clearly not on the mend. He was very clearly still a radicalised danger. And, I mean, I know that I think the law needs to take account of the fact that these are different people. These are not, your average criminal. They're not people that are going to steal a car. They're not people that are going to burgle somebody's house. They want to slit somebody's throat, and nobody's going to stop them.
Right, and we need, and I'm sure we're going to get a new sentencing regime which allows for people who are present a continuing threat to be recalled to prison when there's the slightest sign of them, acting in a way which presents a risk to the public.
Yeah, but what about you don't let them out? What about we change the sentencing structure for terrorism somehow?
Right, and that is entirely possible, but you can't do it retrospectively. It can't be done in relation
Why not?
to what happened in the past. Well, because we live in a country which is defined by laws and
yeah, but I think it's time to stop hiding. With respect, David, I think it's time to stop hiding behind that. Because these people...
We're not the Soviet Union, or we're not,
we don't need to become the Soviet Union, but we have a clear and present threat. issued by people who are quite happy to know that they're threatening us, and they're quite happy for us to know that they're threatening us, and who don't care that we know, because they will kill as many people as they can for this ridiculous and dopey cause that they have.
You can't send people to prison without a law that creates a criminal offence that allows them to go to prison. So, this can be done going forward, but you can't do it looking back.
No, I'm not talking about locking people up who haven't done anything. I'm talking about keeping people in who have done something.
Right, but they've been given a sentence at the point at which they were sentenced.
Yeah,
but
I mean, even when you rent a mobile phone, David, the terms and conditions can change while you've got it, and something can why can't you change the terms and conditions
a mobile phone contract and putting somebody in prison?
Yeah, it's a lot more dangerous when you're messing about with people's lives than it is when your mobile phone contract suddenly doesn't include insurance cover. But they tell you.
Sure. Can I move this off that subject very slightly for a second? Because I found a very interesting tweet from the election campaign from October of last year.
Right.
The MP for Streatham, Belle Rivera, as the MP, and she says, as Tories have repeatedly attacked our civil liberties, as Streatham's MP, I would stand up against attempts to undermine our human rights and against discriminatory counter-terrorism policies like Prevent.
Yeah.
So, I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw that, because that's the local MP for Streatham basically saying that Prevent, the thing that is designed to identify and prevent terrorist attacks before they happen and keep people out of extremism and radicalisation, ought to be scrapped. And that is really a perfect example of a tweet that hasn't aged at all well.
Yes, no, I get that. And I fear that there are too many people who would agree with that particular tweet and that particular sentiment as well. However, that is presumably not the view of the government. Priti Patel has made it very clear since she became Home Secretary that she wants to make this a much tougher sentencing structure, that she wants to make things different, and she wants to make Britain a safer place for ordinary people to walk around without, getting some jihadi running down the street with a knife that they've stolen from a nearby shop.
Right, and because she's a Democrat, and a democratic country from a democratic party, the Conservative Party, that respects the rule of law, she knows, and she will only ever be able to do that sort of thing prospectively. There is no way, there is simply no mechanism whereby people who have already been sentenced can have their sentences
I understand that.
increased.
I understand that. But the people who are given sentences surely can be told you will serve that sentence out. There's absolutely nothing in the law book which says that they must be released early, is there?
No, there is. I mean, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but one of the basic principles of sentencing is that you can't change the regime under which people are sentenced.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is that letting people out early is a kind of a gift, right? It's something which is granted. It's not something which is written down. It's not something which, when you get sentenced to 10 years in prison, everybody goes, don't worry, you'll get out after 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem of terminology, though, because, since the 1980s, we've always had a sort of early release regime. But certainly since the 1980s, there's always been a regime in place that basically requires you to serve part of your sentence in prison, and then for the rest of it, you are subject to the power to be instantly recalled to prison. And people are instantly recalled to prison under that power. Now, if what you said was that somebody had not a 10-year sentence where they get out at 5 years, but rather a 5-year sentence where they were subject to recall for another 5 years, then I think people would be happier with that. But it's because we talk about it in terms of early release that we have this problem. The crucial thing is that we have an extended period during which, if a person shows signs of reoffending, they can be recalled to prison. And if we call it early release, it makes people unhappy. But if we would call it something else, then it would still perform the same function.
And what about the fact of what happened in Northern Ireland during the time of the Troubles? Because there were plenty of things that changed there about the way that people were locked up, about the way that people were held, and about the way that internment worked. Yeah,
but ultimately, we ultimately beat the IRA by completely infiltrating their entire organisation and putting them into a position.
Yes, but what I'm saying from a legal perspective, though, David, we were able to do things judiciously and within the judicial system, which meant that worked outside of what you might otherwise normally call the democratic legal process.
Right. I mean, I'm not in favour of bringing back internment. Yeah,
but what I'm saying is it's been done before, so I'm not saying we bring back internment. What I'm saying is that your argument that, you can't change the law just because it feels like something you want to do, it turns out, yes, you can.
Well, yeah, yeah, but these people have not been sentenced to prison for criminal offence. They were detained.
Yeah, well, there were plenty of people who were arrested on the streets of Belfast who hadn't been found guilty of anything either.
Right, and these sorts of things create huge, huge problems for countries going forward. I mean, you'll remember that America did it to all Japanese citizens, or many Japanese citizens, during the Second World War.
Yeah.
We interned Germans in Britain with perhaps less controversy during the Second World War. But I don't want to be blasé about this, but I was really impressed by the resilience of people in Streatham to what was going on. You know, the cafe owner.
No, we're all very resilient. No, we're all terribly resilient, David. I mean, I was sitting yesterday. No, listen, I was sitting there yesterday watching Sky News, thinking, actually, you know, they're making more of this than they need to. But that's only because we've been conditioned to expect every so often some nutter to go waving a knife down the street and stabbing people. But what I hope we never see is what they saw in Paris, in the Bataclan, where you suddenly get gangs of people getting out of cars with submachine guns, just killing people at random.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll be asking you why you were complacent.
Yeah, but you know, in a situation like the Bataclan, that was clearly a phenomenal failure of police intelligence and security services intelligence.
Yes.
We like to think we're rather better at that sort of thing in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I know, but I think it's time we stopped preening ourselves on our intelligence knowledge.
Morning, Mike.
Morning, Henry. How are you doing?
Well, I want to thank you and your team so much for keeping my spirits up over the last few years.
Not at all.
You've been amazing, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, what I want to speak about is this stabbing situation.
Yeah.
I've had a big insight into the people who are carrying out these things, not just the terrorist things, but the quite mainstream. It's an awful thing to say. The people who are stabbing at random.
Yes, the general sort of knife crime. Yeah.
You've got it. Now we've got to have a completely different outlook on how these people are, at the very first instance, dealt with. The first thing must be they must not be put straight in with all their buddies to have a nice little knees up in our prisons, which are an absolute disgrace.
Right.
The first thing, they must be isolated, and the only people they must come into contact with are qualified mentors and people who can talk some rational, decent sense and let them know that their behavior is totally unacceptable. You see, what happens, but you'll have to trust me on it, I've been inside the high security prisons.
Have you?
And they are a serious, what's the word I'd like to use, breeding ground for this. We've got a prison very close to me, I won't say which one, that's full of terrorists, and it's like a gentleman's club, but just for terrorists.
Well, my view of prison, Henry, is that you shouldn't want to go back in there, and while you are in there, it should not be a place that you enjoy anything, really. And I know that there are those outside of it who will say, oh, yes, but the punishment's already locking you up. If you don't care about being locked up, it's not punishment.
Oh, it's not about not caring. Let me tell you, the quality of life, there are millions of people in the world who would give anything to have the quality of life that these people are given.
Yeah.
I'm not joking, Mike. It's a disgrace, and I think I've mentioned this to you once before. I would insist that every new MP spend at least a couple of nights, I'd rather more, in a cell, in a prison. Okay, you don't have to let people know they're there, and give them the CCTV filtered through to them so they can hear and see what really is going on in the prisons. Because I know prison officers who are scared to death every day they go to work, and that is no way. It's really the lunatics running.
No, you're absolutely right, Henry. Thanks very much indeed. I've got to run just because we've got a lot of calls to take today. We do want to get to all of them. But there was a case just the other week, wasn't there, where a couple of jihadis decided to attack a prison officer. Let's talk to Derek, who's in Hastings. Hi, Derek.
Good morning to you, Mike.
Morning, sir.
And a bright day from Hastings here.
Very nice.
Yeah, I mean, I know this would sort of send all the woke people absolutely round the bend, but I think that we ought to have, and I think there would be a popular demand for this if it was really mooted, that we ought to have the death penalty back for anybody who deliberately murders anybody in the name of terrorism.
Yes, I don't think you would get an argument with a lot of people for that. The problem is, of course, that in this particular guy's case, you know, Sudesh Amman, he hadn't murdered anybody. He was in prison because of some of the things he'd been doing on the internet, some of the things he'd been saying to people, so his sentence was relatively short. My argument is that if he is thought to be a danger... Yep. You know, I understand that you can't sentence people to life in prison because of something that they said or because of something that they thought. But if you genuinely think that they're a danger, there must be a place we can keep them without letting them back on the street, surely.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. Perhaps we ought to try and find some remote island.
Well, I wouldn't be against that. Absolutely right.
Where we could lock them all up. I do believe there would be a strong popular support for that kind of move.
Yeah.
Can I just mention your other thing, your Plank of the Week favourite, the BBC?
Yes.
Last Friday night, the BBC coverage in this neck of the woods amounted to a sort of a mourning of Brighton people and the mourning in Scotland of the loss of the EU and the report of a few hundred people in Parliament Square.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And who were all apparently, according to the BBC reporter, all white, which of course they weren't, because I was there and there was plenty of people who were not white.
Yeah, I know. Maya Toube actually put a really good photo on.
He did.
Yeah.
That's right. He did. Him and all his mates who happened to be brown. It's incredible, isn't it, Derek? I think they may well feature again this week, actually, the BBC, because of the coverage that they gave to Brexit over the course of the weekend and how ridiculous it is that they can't just seem to accept the fact that we have indeed now left the European Union, that things will be different. There's no point in banging on about how great the European Union is anymore because it's no longer something we are a part of. So just get over it, will you? 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook. We're live as well on Twitter, of course. You can live stream it in many, many different ways. We might even find more ways of live streaming, actually, as the days and weeks go on. Coming up, we'll be talking to Christopher Snowdon about this business of how we have to all change our heating in the house and how we have to change the cars that we drive because we're going to be told to do so by the energy regulator. I'm sorry, we're not living in North Korea now, are we?
Well, I think clearly the de-radicalisation programme isn't working,
right.
And there are clearly massive problems with the criminal justice system as it is applied to these people. Meantime, I think we've also got to recognise that this incident, like the previous one, is a tragedy for everyone concerned. Now, I know you get a lot of gung-ho comments about shooting terrorists on social media when things like this happen. I actually have to say I have a certain sympathy for the perpetrator too, who's a foolish young man who's been programmed by very wicked people. And those are the people we've got to stop doing their thing. I mean, for example, our prisons now are basically schools for fundamentalism. This whole issue is out of control in our prisons.
Yeah.
The other thing is you have to think of the effect it has on the actual police officers who are involved in this stuff. I mean, I have a friend of mine who was a Met officer who did shoot someone, and he never really recovered from it. And he ended his own life was ended prematurely.
Right. Was that because of the way that he felt about what he had done, or because of the way he was treated, though?
I think it was more than that. I mean, this particular guy had a lot of very bad experiences with homicide cases.
Yeah.
He had a number of commendations for bravery, but no one ever helped him. He never really had any counselling for it. I mean, It's a big deal to take someone's life.
Sure.
And it's, not something you talk glibly about.
No, I don't think so. But let me ask you something else about this particular individual, Sudesh Amman. I'm assuming he was born here. I haven't seen any information that he was not. And he was from Harrow originally, appears to have lived with his mother, doesn't appear to have been a father figure around. His mother was in the court with him when he was sentenced and he was laughing in the Old Bailey. His mother was kind of still, I suppose you might say, titularly in charge of him as a teenager. Is there any point in going after the parents in these cases? Because it seems to me that as much as, yes, he was radicalised by something he saw on YouTube and by ISIS and what was going on in the Middle East. But, if your son is behaving like that, as a parent, surely you've got a duty to society to do something.
That's a really difficult one, isn't it? And the degree of this kid's disturbance is made clear by the fact that he seems to have been encouraging his girlfriend to murder her parents.
And his siblings.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, really disturbing and sad stuff. And it's not something that's just going to go away.
Right.
It's going to take probably uncomfortable action to do something about it. Now, I'm far from convinced that our government, any recent government, has been willing to take the sort of action that is required. I mean, it's going to take tough action.
Yeah.
You know, stuff that some people are going to complain about. But public safety must come first.
But it must. But also, I'm keen to try and establish a differentiation. You know, as our friend David Toube said, well, we don't want to become the Soviet Union. Well, there is a middle ground. You don't have to become the Soviet Union and start locking everybody up you don't like. But you surely can lock up the people who are a danger to the public.
I think the other thing is, I mean, let's grasp the nettle here. I mean, there are certainly a significant number of mosques in the UK that are still sympathetic to the radical line.
Yeah.
And we're not getting into them, and we're not doing enough about it. Similarly, in our prisons, radicalism rules the roost. I mean, the bullying fundamentalists are often the guys that are more or less in charge of the prison.
Yeah.
And people are terrified of going to prison for that reason. Now, we're not doing enough about that. Now, what do you do with them? Do you segregate them? I don't know. But it's going to take drastic action.
Yeah.
And this stuff will continue. And remember, meantime, there are people all around the world pumping out this radical material, instructions on how to make bombs, doing all the stuff that you can get online. And although, there has been some attention to what was available online, people are still getting at that material. So It's obviously not enough. It's not working sufficiently well. Meantime, again, I say spare a thought for those policemen who actually have to be at the sharp end of this sort of stuff. I mean, the police must be hopping mad.
Well, they are. And as I say, I mean, the fact that the police asked for this guy not to be released on the basis that they believed him to be dangerous, they then decided, thank God, that it was a good idea to follow him around. And I've got the greatest respect for the police in this country, particularly the armed anti-terror police, for what they do. I think they're brilliant. They respond remarkably quickly. They're always judicious in the way that they act, and they are under immense pressure to save lives. And it's all split-second stuff. But why why should they have to do it?
No, quite. But let's just stop there just for a moment and reflect on that. They have to get inside the perpetrator's reaction time. Yeah. An almost impossible task, which they seem to have done in this case. All right, the people were injured, but they did stop it, and they stopped it very quickly. I mean, a terribly, terribly difficult task for the guys on the ground.
Sure.
And I do feel for them, and I think
because one of these times, Mike, the suicide vest won't be a hoax.
No, and of course, as I think Rory Stewart pointed out the other day, methods can change. This is just the methodology that we're facing at the moment because these guys have got easy access to knives.
Oh, that sounded to me like Mike Yardley's line just dropped. So. We shall try and get him back. It actually, it does sound like sounds like the old system of the payphone when you ran out of money and you had to put another 10p in or another farthing or whatever it was. We'll try and get Mike back, but we've almost finished with him. But we do want to hear from you, of course. Now, some people are telling me there's a couple of problems with the YouTube feed. It seems to be buffering quite a lot, but don't worry. I'm sure there are people, even as we speak, working on it. But apparently the Twitter feed is running better, and the Facebook feed may or may not be running better. We've just got a few gremlins. It's probably down to the fact that we've left the European Union and everything's broken. It'll be something like that, won't it? Let's talk back now to Mike Yardley. We've got him back. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry
Mike,
about that.
You for a moment.
Yeah, no problem.
But the thing that isn't going to go away, though, is the need for drastic action. And we are going to have to, really do something tough about this because it isn't going to go away. The problem in our prisons isn't going to vanish. The problem in mosques around Britain isn't going to vanish. And because we're all so worried about being politically correct, we don't get on with it.
Yeah.
Now, we all know that this isn't about mainstream Islam. We know that this is about fanaticism. We know that this is about wicked people who try and seek out insecure young men to achieve their political objectives.
But you know what I was thinking over the course of yesterday, Mike, and I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but the failure of the government to act against these people, and I know it's very difficult, and I realise that it's not an easy task, but the failure to stop this from happening is actually bad for all Muslims in this country because what it does is it drives the prejudice against them and makes it look as though the Muslim community is doing nothing to stop it.
You've got to remember with this that I think members of the Muslim community themselves are rather frightened about some members of their own community, and they're very, they're wary of speaking out. I think they're going to have to do it, though.
Yeah.
I think that we are going to have to say, no, look, this is partly your problem, and you must be part of the solution, because what's going on at the moment just isn't fair on the rest of us, and we are not willing to suffer these consequences routinely.
No.
So you are going to have to speak up, and I think millions of people in the country would support that.
When you look at the detail of what Sudesh Amman was convicted of, that there are so many sort of red flags or red lights flashing that, he was using encryption, he was clearly pledging allegiance to Islamic State, he was seeking martyrdom. All of those things add together, really, to somebody who shouldn't have been walking the streets. And the fact that the authorities were working at the level they were, that they had armed plainclothes police following him, a week or so after he was released from prison, just shows how dangerous this man was. But it also shows what an unfair position that the police and the security services are being put in by our legal structures, that we can't expect them to be constantly having to intervene in such cases, because we're releasing people who are still dangerous.
Yeah, exactly right. And I suppose the difficult bit here is that if somebody like him is sentenced to 3 years or so for what it was that he was found guilty of at the Old Bailey, which I know everybody would say, well, he's clearly a danger to society, but you can't sentence him to too long under the sort of terms. How did you identify him as a guy who was going to be dangerous?
Well, we were looking at the list. I think it became clear back in 2018 that there was, for various reasons, a large number of people who were due to be released for terrorist offences and that are going to be coming out on the streets in quite a short time frame. And we looked again, I think, after the Usman Khan case, the London Bridge attack, if you remember. That was somebody, I think, who'd worked, if you like, to pull the wool over the eyes of the authorities. Here you had somebody who, if you look at anybody looks at the section on the Crown Prosecution Service website about his conviction, or looks at the media reports at the time, he was belligerent during his sentencing. He didn't seem to be showing any type of regret. And I think it's worth stressing with some of these individuals who've been arrested, convicted in recent years, these are people who missed out on going to Islamic State. They missed out on sort of actually existing Sharia of the Caliphate. And so, they're up for it, if you like. These are people who are very motivated individuals. And that's really what brought him to our attention.
And there's still plenty more of them to go around, aren't there? Because the worry we've got now, of course, is that, while we're all pretty much sick to the back teeth of seeing this kind of thing happening, you kind of know it's going to happen again.
Well, I'm afraid you don't like to tempt fate, but we've now had 3 attacks in round about a 3-month period. We had London Bridge, obviously released terrorist. We had the attack in Whitemoor Prison, the alleged attack there by a convicted terrorist, and then yesterday's events in Streatham. So, we really do need some action, and I think it's time now for a moratorium on prison releases of convicted terrorists. The government, I think there's going to be an announcement later today from Boris Johnson, but we really do need to hear some action now, because people need to be free to go about their business on the streets without being attacked by religious fanatics. Yeah,
and also we need to know a bit more about the families that these people are coming from, because I'm looking now at a piece from Sky News, because apparently Sudesh Amman's mother has been interviewed by Sky News. Her name's Inzi Rashid. She regards her son as a nice, polite boy, who she says she spoke to just a few hours before the attack. Now, it's all very well for a mother's love to extend to her own son, but this is a woman who watched him in court, who heard the evidence about him telling his girlfriend to behead her parents, who heard about his wish to die. I'm sorry, if you're still calling your son a nice, polite boy, there's something wrong.
Well, this is a problem we faced, I'm afraid, with the problem of the issue of British jihadis going back really to the late 90s, early 2000s, of a succession of ever more weedy excuses or support, be it from family members or from representative organisations. And, we get it every time, he was a good lad, our Imran, or whatever.
Right.
And, our little Imran's sharing videos online talking about Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. In the particular case of Sudesh Amman, I believe there was a family WhatsApp group, and he was circulating jihadist material on there.
Yeah.
two younger siblings.
Well, that's what...
If that doesn't concern his mother, I'm not
exactly.
sure what would concern her.
And my wonder about all of this as well is that quite often, I mean, I'm assuming, you might be able to tell me this, I haven't seen it written anywhere that Sudesh was actually born in Harrow. He's from Harrow. I presume he was probably born in this country. But a lot of these young jihadis are born in this country, and so when you hear the kind of cries, deport them, send them back, well, there's nobody to send them back to other than Harrow. But if the parents are still living in this country and came from elsewhere, is there any merit in deporting them?
Well, only if they've committed criminal offences could we do so. But I think we do need to ask much harder questions sometimes of the families and indeed of the representative organisations. And people listening will know some of those organisations that I'm talking about, who constantly seem to provide us with a sort of backdrop of grievance after terrorist attacks, rather than actually taking a bit of responsibility, saying things are going wrong here, we're going to do something about it. Because if they're not going to, the government will. And
if a child, as you say, if a child of yours is circulating illegal material calling for the deaths of people, right, then therefore, I'm sorry, that's a colluding or a collusional style of crime, isn't it?
Well, it is. I think it is worth stressing as well, in other cases, we have seen excellent support sometimes from family members, from relatives, neighbours who've become alarmed at people's actions, become alarmed at some of their opinions and passed information on to the authorities. It's important that they do so. But you know, when you hear examples like what seems to be happening with Sudesh Amman's parents, you do really worry about the direction that the society is heading in. And, you know, we need to be far more robust at saying so.
Yeah, and what possibility do you see the government being able to sort of do to achieve that? Because obviously, you know, they've been talking pretty tough since London Bridge, which was back in November, but this only happened a couple of weeks ago, this guy was released, and seemingly against the will of the government.
Yes, he seems to have been released within the past week, and very quickly a decision taken for what appears to be, you know, a big surveillance operation around him. I think we need to be hearing something pretty positive from the Prime Minister today in terms of a moratorium on the release of convicted terrorists, if at all possible, and a very serious review of those who are in these. I think Sudesh Amman was in a bail hostel. We need to be looking pretty carefully at those who are in similar locations, because we can't expect the authorities to be following all of these people when we have this much wider pool of, if you remember 2017, we were talking about potentially there being over 20,000 people of interest to the police in terms of Islamist terrorism. Right. The problem isn't a needle in a haystack. The problem now is the number of needles.
Well, that's right. Because, as I've said earlier on this show today, the danger for anyone out there from the Muslim community is that the less that gets done about this by the government, the more, you know, they become hated by people in this country who see all Muslims as somehow potential terrorists.
Yes, not everybody is discerning enough to recognise that this is a minority trend within contemporary Sunni Islam. It's important to say that and important to recognise that. It's equally important, though, Mike, that we don't do what I call the pivot response to terrorism and pivot into talking about, you know, some people's politically incorrect comments about this problem. We need to focus on the problem. We need to address it. We need to get it sorted and not be distracted by that grievance industry, because what will happen in the next 24, 48 hours is those who have kept quiet at the moment will try and pivot onto those types of types of debates, and it'll be about some, you know, loudmouth figure on the right wing rather than the particular problem of jihadism in this country.
Yeah, exactly right. And because until and unless the government can prevent this thing from happening, and it's not so much that they can prevent it from happening, you know, forthwith, and it will never, ever see the light of day again, but they have to prevent it from happening by somebody who's just been released. They've got to stop that.
Yes, that's something that the authorities are, to a great extent, in control But equally, we have to recognise that people will be released from prison. They will serve their time, do their sentence. They're going to be released. So that, if you like, takes us back to the types of debates we were having after London Bridge about the counter-radicalisation programmes, and indeed whether it's possible to de-radicalise people who have very different motivations to, if you like, ordinary criminals who are looking to gain wealth, gain status. Here you may well have people who are seeking martyrdom. That's why this guy's wearing the fake suicide vest. He knows the police are going to have to kill him.
I mean, you know more about this subject than I do, but surely the bottom line here is that I don't know if you may know of cases. I don't know of any cases of people who have been members of a radical Islamic group who've wanted to kill themselves for the cause, who have suddenly changed their minds.
Well, there's various former extremists of differing stripes who do pop up in different think tanks and different organisations. But I'm afraid in some cases with those who are very committed to these organisations, it may only be old age that makes them look at the threat.
No, exactly right. Well, Paul, thank you very much indeed, as ever. Dr. Paul Stott there from the Henry Jackson Society.